So, let's talk about Viking werewolves in space. Warhammer 40k is an amazing fictional universe that I've been a fan of for about 20 years now. And in that time, not a single faction in this grimdark world has captured my attention quite as much as the Space Wolves. That said, many people in the community do not share my opinion. Some dislike or even outright hate the wolves. And yes, some of the criticism is actually valid, and even I, as the Space Vikings' most loyal soldier, can agree with parts of it. Nevertheless, I disagree with most of the complaints surrounding the wolves and believe they have far more to offer than people often give them credit for. So, as a way of defending my favorite gang of alcoholics, I'd like to give you all a better understanding of what they are and show exactly why I absolutely love the Space Wolves. When the Sixth Legion of the Adeptus Astartes was created, they quickly became infamous for their pretty much unparalleled brutality. And that is saying something, as they had some stiff competition in that department. Some of the other original legions were also rather loose in their interpretation of rules of engagement, but for the Sixth, for them that shit wasn't even a suggestion in the first place. If these barbarians were sent on a hunt, everyone's dying. And I do mean everyone, not even your pet hamster would be left alive once they were done with you. In fact, the way the Sixth conducted business was so messed up that other legions started calling them the Rout. Originally used as a derogatory nickname, the word actually summarized the legion's identity quite well, and was later adopted by the Sixth as their preferred way to refer to themselves. Even now, the Space Wolves still like to call themselves Vilka Fenrika, meaning the Wolves of Fenris, or simply the Rout, and generally hate their official name. At this point, you probably understand that the Sixth Legion was pretty damn good at killing. But what exactly made them that way? You see, the gene seed of the Rout had one special addition called the Canis Helix, aka the wolf gene. This part of their biology enhanced the strength, agility, and senses of each legionnaire of the Sixth, even further than the already superhuman capabilities of any other space marine. It also came with a very neat bonus, being especially resistant to the ruinous powers of chaos, as well as appearing more bestial, fangs, claws, leathery skin, yellow glowing eyes, that sort of thing. How being partly a wolf correlates with having the ability to confidently say fuck off to the four incarnations of Satan is beyond me. But it is undeniably cool. And frankly, stranger things have happened in Warhammer, so I'm not complaining. Not everything was well and good though, as the Sixth Legion's genetic code had some very serious downsides too. The Canis Helix made their gene seed probably one of the most unstable among all of the legions. The bodies of most recruits straight up rejected it, making the Rout's numbers relatively small and hard to replenish. It also made the Marines significantly more prone to aggression, which definitely boosted their ability to kill things real good, but made controlling the Sixth on the battlefield virtually impossible, as during combat they acted more like a pack of rabid animals than an actual military force. And there was one other thing, but we'll talk about it later. All this made deploying the Rout a special and rare occasion during the unification wars on Terror and the early Great Crusade. Yet, when the Sixth was deployed, it was to send a message. You do not fuck with the Imperium, and if you do, the Rout will be set loose on your ass. They were the Emperor's executioners, and they were very good at their job. It wasn't long though before the Sixth got their gene sire back, Leman Russ. He was the second Primarch found, right after the Big Bald himself. Well, technically, one of the contradictory twins might have been found first, which would put Lehman in third place, but due to the usual Alpha Legion bullshittery, that might not even be true, so go figure. Nevertheless, with the return of Russ, the gene seed of the Sixth Legion, now officially known as the Space Wolves, stabilized a bit, as a couple of tweaks were made to make it more closely resemble the Primarch's genetic pattern. Additionally, with the Big Bad Wolf Dad back, the rout started to resemble an actual cohesive military force, following his command without question. Shocking shit, I know. However, there was still a bit of a hiccup. When Lehman first met his Terran Jin sons, let's just say he wasn't impressed, and that's putting it lightly. He took one look at this gang of ravaging berserkers, decided that even for him it was a bit too much, and proceeded to throw his legion straight into the bloodiest conflict he could find, which resulted in a third of the rout being killed off, including most, if not all, of the legion's senior leadership. Then Russ replaced them with actual space Vikings, and made it so that the new recruits for the Legion came only from his homeworld of Fenris, which is still the case even in the 41st millennium. Needless to say, in short order, all of the Space Wolves were Fenrisian born, with a culture of honor, courage, and, most importantly, drinking, rather than mindless slaughter of their predecessors. But don't you fret, the sixth were still literally wolves in human form, so brutal murder on an astronomical level came naturally to them, as they proved many times during the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, and all of the blood-soaked centuries that followed. During the Great Crusade, the wolves were quite busy, bringing many worlds into compliance with the Imperium, and even came to blows with some of the other Legionis Astartes, namely the Dark Angels and the Warhounds. That said, they were still the Emperor's executioners, and although this isn't directly stated in the official lore, there is a very prevalent theory in the Warhammer community that Russ and the Wolves were the ones responsible for both of the missing Space Marine legions and their Primarchs becoming, well, missing. There is actually a lot of merit to that theory, considering the rout was pretty damn good at fighting other Space Marines, and during the Horus Heresy Russ even wrote a book on Astartes versus Astartes combat. As I already started talking about the heresy, let's jump into that pit of snakes, shall we? All in all, everything was going swimmingly, right up until Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's favorite son and War Master of the Imperium's forces, got shanked with a chaos shiv, almost dying from the wound it left. Then this bitch started whispering sweet nothings into his ear, basically amounting to the Emperor is cringe, and proceeded to perform some kind of chaos bullshit healing ritual on Horus, which worked, but corrupted the big bold in the process, making him a pawn of the chaos gods. Needless to say, things went to shit very quickly afterwards. Somewhere along the line, Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns Legion, as per usual for him, done fucked up real bad. And who else but Russ and his sons were tasked with bringing him before the Emperor to face judgment. At the last second though, Horus said "Nuh-uh" and told Lehman to straight up kill the one-eyed disappointment. The fact that the big bolt had turned traitor wasn't widespread yet. Plus Russ allegedly might have done something like this twice already, so he trusted his big bro's word without question. Thus, Prospero, homeworld of the Thousand Suns, burned, Magnus felt the power of Russ's knee on his back, and the Thousand Suns with their Primarch joined Chaos. Lovely stuff all around, wouldn't you say? Right after that nasty business was wrapped up, the Wolves were hit with a surprise attack from the Alpha Legion, which was a bitch and a half because the rout's numbers were already heavily depleted from all of the burning they did on Prospero. But with unexpected help from the Dark Angels, they managed to survive. Afterwards, Lehman went on a little bit of a hiatus to find himself, and later tried to 1v1 Horus in hopes of bringing him back to sanity. He kinda succeeded, but not quite, and ended up catatonic for some time as a result. The Wolves, for the second time now, were pursued by the traitorous forces, but yet again were saved by another Astartes Legion, the Raven Guard. Then came the Siege of Terra, which Russ and the Wolves completely missed on account of being too far away. By the time they arrived, the whole Horus Heresy fiasco had ended, and the Arch-Traitor was dead. Things were far from peaceful though, as much of the War Master's armies were still at large. Thus, the Great Scouring began, and the rout eagerly spearheaded the efforts to relentlessly hunt the traitors, until the last of them disappeared into the warp rift known as the Eye of Terror. After everything was said and done, Russ left on some kind of self-imposed mission, but promised to come back eventually. The Space Wolves are still waiting though, and even go out on the great hunts every once in a while to search for him, but so far to no avail. That said, with the Grand Smurf and General Genocide returning from their 10 millennia long absences, there is hope that the Wolf King might be back soon too. Nevertheless, even without Russ to guide them, the Wolves did quite well in the 10,000 years after the heresy. They've been through many, and by many I mean a metric ton of conflicts purging both Xenos and heretics. The Wolves do not discriminate, and in the spirit of being progressive, they also tend to do the unthinkable, actually defend the citizens of the Imperium. Absolutely inconceivable notion, I know, but they did exactly that in the aftermath of the First War for Armageddon. That conflict in particular was a tough one, and that is putting it very lightly. In fact, it was so bad that even the Inquisition and the Grey Knights, a secret Space Marine chapter specializing in combating demons, had to get involved to resolve it. But here's the thing. The official Imperial stance on the matter of chaos is that it doesn't exist. There are no powers beyond your comprehension, dear citizen, and stating otherwise is heresy. So the Inquisitor in charge tried to forcibly sterilize and quarantine for life the defenders of the planet for the crime of finding out that this is, in fact, not the case. The Space Wolves chapter master, Logan Grimnar, thought this idea to be, how should I put it, utter and complete bullshit. And, rightfully so, I might add. Look at the history of Cadia, for example. Thus, the Wolves tried to save as many people as they could, and when the temperature in the room got too hot for comfort, they even went to war with the Inquisition, which is the most powerful organization in the entire Imperium. And you know what? They were fucking winning. That said, this conflict, now known as the Mounts of Shame, was promptly resolved before a new heresy could start. The Wolves took heavy losses though, and their chapter monastery on Fenris, the Fane, sustained more damage than when Magnus the Failure came back to get revenge for Prospero. Speaking of which, he tried to do it again, but Logan Grimnar is the man, so the nerd got humbled even worse than the first time. The Thousand Sons are generally the Wolves' favorite enemy, so much so that if the Rout finds out that they have appeared anywhere in the galaxy, you can bet the house that the Sons of Russ are going on a hunt. While we are on the topic of chaos, remember Cadia? Well, during its last stand, the Wolves were there too, as well as being heavily involved in defending the Cadian Gate as a whole against Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade. All in all, I think at this point you've got a pretty good idea what the Wolves were mostly up to throughout their history. So now let's switch to the inner workings of my favorite space alcoholics. To become a space wolf, one needs to literally die first. It goes a little like this. You live on Fenris as a tribal barbarian. Life is hard, resources are scarce, and enemies are many. Sooner rather than later, you will meet your end. But if you die in battle and prove yourself an exceptional warrior, one of these guys who just so happened to be observing the fighting might be impressed enough to take you to one of the 3 Space Wolves training camps, to be revived and become an aspirant of the chapter. In the camp, recruits are divided into squads called packs, and are trained and tested further in their abilities, the most important of which is their capability to work together. It's not uncommon for tensions within a pack to rise for many reasons. For example, a new recruit might find himself packmates with a former enemy, since the Wolves take the best warriors regardless of which side they fought for in their last battle. Each aspirant must understand that this is quite literally the beginning of his new life. The old rules no longer apply, and he needs to make peace with that fact. Those recruits who pass the training camp tutorial, and by the way not many do, take part in the next 2 trials, known as the Trials of Morkai. The first is a psychic probing conducted by the librarians of the Space Wolves, testing each aspirant for any potential corruption by chaos in their future. If the aspirant fails, he just dies on the spot, but if he passes, he gets to move on to the final trial, the test of Morkai. And that's when the real fun begins. The aspirants drink from the cup of Wolfin, which contains the Canis helix. Their bodies begin to rapidly change, recruits grow fangs and claws, their bones fuse and strengthen, and their senses sharpen to an almost supernatural degree. It isn't a pleasant process by any means, and many aspirants simply die during it. But that's just the start of the trial. After the transformation is complete, the aspirants are dropped off somewhere far away from the Fane with no weapons and told to make their way back or die trying. Alone, with no help, with no guidance, just them against the Fenris itself. But yet again, that's not all. Remember how I mentioned earlier one other downside of the Canis helix? Well, you see, on top of everything I've already described, the worst part is that it can turn you from a human with wolf-like traits into an actual fucking werewolf. And once you turn, there is no going back. Nobody in the Space Wolves is free from the curse of the wolfen. And that shit doesn't have an expiration date either. You can be hundreds of years old, half dead inside a goddamn dreadnought and still succumb to it. So, on top of having to find their way back to the Fang through the wilderness of this snowball of death, which has wolves and bears of absolutely colossal proportions, not to mention actual mythical creatures like trolls, krakens, and well, I don't know, fucking dragons, the aspirants also have to battle the very real beast within themselves. Safe to say, recruits seldom pass this trial. But those who do are fully transformed into Space Marines and become neophytes of the Space Wolves chapter. After the heresy and the scouring, Primarch of the Smurfs, aka Ultramarines, Rebut Gilliman took it upon himself to revise the way legions of Space Marines should behave moving forward. He wrote the Codex Astartes, which outlines the organization, tactics and strategy for all of the Loyalist legions to follow. Although the Codex was created with good intentions in mind, it became quite a controversial topic, as the new regulations were extremely blueberry coded and didn't take into account already established ways of operational procedure in other legions. Rogel Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, almost started a new heresy because of this bullshit, but eventually even he complied. However, Russ found a workaround. One of the key organizational principles described in the Codex is that each legion cannot have more than 1,000 Battle Brother roster, divided into 10 companies, as dealing with 1,000 chaos-corrupted Space Marines is way easier than with an unlimited amount, which was the previous standard. Because of this, legions that had more than 1,000 members had to split into separate entities, creating their first successor chapters. But the Wolves were already divided within themselves into 13 great companies, practically making them 13 different chapters underneath one banner. This, coupled with how notoriously headstrong and unaccommodating Russ could be, made Gilliman not push the agenda further and be content with a compromise. However, the deviations from the Codex only start there. As I already stated, the Space Wolves originally had 13 great companies, which is 12 now, as the 13th one was lost in the war for 10,000 years and never re-established. It has returned though during Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, but as of now the specifics of its reintegration into the fold are unknown. Unlike in the Codex compliant chapters, the number of Battle Brothers in each company is not maxed out at 100 and varies greatly. This in turn makes the sum total of the Wolf chapter's members potentially significantly exceed the 1,000-man limit. In addition, the route doesn't have a scout company, reserve companies, or a veteran company, as every great company has all of the possible designations at the same time, making it a completely self-sufficient military force. A mobile one too, as their favorite battle tactic is a quick and brutal assault with a shit ton of melee combat. The specifics may vary as each great company has its own preferred way of going about committing bloody murder, but in the end it boils down to a different variant of the same shock and awe tactics. Wolves, being what they are, also have a giant-ass fleet and an arsenal that includes, but isn't limited to, weaponry not seen in any other chapter, like Frost melee weapons and Hellfrost ranged ones, and war machines dating back to the times of the Great Crusade, which you might think is bad, but in the Warhammer 40k universe, old is usually better than new. Usually. Speaking of which, until very recently the Space Wolves were the only original Space Marine chapter to not have any successor chapters whatsoever. One part of it is that many chapters in one kind of deal, but the more truthful answer is different. In the aftermath of the Scouring, one successor chapter was created called the Wolf Brothers, but their already unstable gene seed mutated so much that the absolute majority of them either turned into wolfen or fell to chaos. Needless to say, the Wolves never did that shit again. But with the introduction of the Primaris Space Marines, the situation has changed dramatically, and now there are at least 3 of their successor chapters out there. The chapter organization system of the route is also something completely unique to the Space Wolves, with much of it being different from the doctrines of the Codex Astartes in virtually everything, from the order of progression through the ranks and reasons behind it to the tactical traditions of each great company. That said, with Primaris Marines being a thing now, all of their tactical designations aren't changed but rather incorporated into the already established way of doing things in the Wolf chapter. The neophytes in the route are called Bloodclaws. Coming right out of indoctrination, young Space Wolves are so bloodthirsty and glory-hungry, it borders on being certifiably insane. Therefore, they fight in the vanguard of their great company's forces and are given very minimal weaponry. This is done to give the pups an opportunity to prove themselves and get their claws bloody, hence the name of the rank, as well as learn how to better control their murderous urges. The Blood Claws have 2 subsets, the Swift Claws and the Sky Claws. The former are pretty much just the same Blood Claws but on fast-moving vehicles like bikes and shit. However, the latter are more interesting. The Sky Claws are composed of the most ruthless members of the Blood Claws, and to make appropriate use of their God Emperor given talents, they are equipped with jetpacks to help them kill shit real good. After some time passes, the wolves start to physically change even more. Their fangs become a bit longer, eyes begin to have this yellowish tint to them, and hair starts to change its color from the previous one to grey. The warriors who live long enough to see these changes manifest are promoted to the rank of Grey Hunters. These are full-blown battle brothers of the chapter, who prove themselves in many conflicts and have a tight grip on their inner rage. As such, they have access to much better weapons and make the bulk of the chapter's forces. Moreover, Grey Hunters with a more grim and dour personality are chosen to become the scouts of the chapter, very creatively named the Wolf Scouts. Eventually, every Space Wolf reaches the end of his puberty, and his physical appearance finalizes. His hair slowly turns snow white, the eyes are now completely yellow in color, and the fangs have grown out to their fullest length, allowing him to reach the rank of a Long Fang. The Long Fangs are extremely respected members of the Wolves, who have experience and wisdom of literally hundreds of years spent fighting, and are the ones permitted to use truly devastating heavy weaponry, more suited to be mounted on tanks rather than carried manually. By the way, like other chapters, the Wolves operate on a squad basis. The number of Marines in each of these so-called packs is not set, but usually around 10 or a little more than that, with one of them being the pack leader. Unlike how it's done in other chapters though, packs are never replenished. I mean, sure, when a Blood Claw becomes a Sky Claw or a Grey Hunter becomes a Wolf Scout, they will transition into a new pack with a similar designation, but once a pack is formed, it never takes in new recruits. Therefore, if a pack of Blood Claws had originally around 10 or 15 Marines, by the time they reach the rank of Long Fangs, there is likely gonna be a third of them left, if that. Eventually they can be granted the honor of joining the Wolf Guard of their company, which is the next progression in rank, However, sometimes, as a result of very unfortunate events, there is only one survivor remaining, and if he hasn't yet proven himself worthy of the Wolf God rank, that warrior takes the mantle of a lone wolf. During battles, he goes out alone, determined to hunt down and kill the biggest and baddest enemies, or if possible, the fucker who killed all of his packmates. More often than not, though, lone wolves die trying, thus earning honorable deaths in combat. However, if they succeed, they are then permitted to join the Wolf Guard. The Wolf Guard is probably the last rank realistically obtainable for the standard battle brother of the chapter, and even then it is highly unlikely. To become a member of the Wolf Guard, the Marine needs to be truly exceptional, achieving feats of martial prowess and heroism of the highest order. They are the creme de la creme of their great company, and thus permitted to wear Terminator armor and get to choose the nicest toys to wield in battle. These mighty warriors are equivalent to both lieutenants and stern guard veterans in the Codex compliant chapters, and as such can be battle leaders, becoming mentors and commanders for their younger battle brothers, join their Wolf Lord's Honor Guard, a designation reserved for only the most elite members of the Wolf Guard, or serve as the head takers, warriors tasked with taking down the Rau's most dangerous foes. The final rank in the hierarchy of each great company is the Wolf Lord. When the previous Wolf Lord dies, it is up to his Wolf Guard to choose the successor from their ranks, rather than the mantle of leadership just passing to the next in line highest ranking officer. Upon taking the position, each new Wolf Lord is free to change the tactics and culture of the company to his liking. He can even change the heraldry of his great company, choosing one of the mythical Fenrisian wolves as his totem, rather than adopting the one of his predecessor. Or he can leave everything as is. It is completely up to every newly appointed Wolf Lord to decide. Therefore, each great company is not stagnant in an already established set of rules, but is subject to change and adaptation. All Wolf Lords are legendary figures in their own right. They embody the qualities of the companies entrusted to them, and when the time comes for a new great wolf to rise, it is one of them who will be chosen to lead the Space Wolves chapter as a whole. But before discussing the position of the Great Wolf himself, first I would like to take a look at the ranks that exist somewhat to the side of the official hierarchy, as well as the straight-up unofficial ones. The Wolf Priests are a combination of apothecaries and chaplains in one. They monitor and tend to both physical and mental health of their brothers, the latter being especially important in a group of people with latent Chihuahua age, and additionally recruit new aspirants. As the primary mentors of the chapter, the Wolf Priests are probably the most respected individuals in the Wolf's hierarchy, second only to the Great Wolf himself. Next in line are the Iron Priests, and they are basically tech marines but wolfier. Their responsibilities are to maintain and repair all of the chapter's equipment, wargear and machinery. However, the most interesting part about them is that the Iron Priests have their own indoctrination process, different from the standard one of the Space Wolves. The Iron Priests only take smiths as their aspirants and subject them to the test of the Iron Gauntlet, which is essentially just making swords and shit while wearing very uncomfortable iron gloves. If the aspirant's work is acceptable, he is then promoted to apprentice and inducted into the Space Wolves. But if he fails, the aspirant is turned into a lobotomized inspector gadget, known as a thrall servitor, who helps the Iron Priests around the Fang or in battle. After the new prospect goes through all of the normal Space Wolves training and is blooded in combat, he must travel to Mars to study in the ways of Cult Mechanicus. Only after completing this can he return and join the ranks of the Iron Priests. The last of the priestly trifecta are the Rune Priests, who serve as the librarians of the wolves. The main difference is that they, contrary to what is accepted truth in this setting, believe their powers come not from the realm of chaos, but from Fenris itself. Even as a die-hard fan of the Space Vikings, this doesn't make a ton of sense to me. What does make sense, though, is that the Space Wolves are not fond of any war fuckery whatsoever, and because of this, the Rune Priests use their psychic abilities very cautiously. They employ ancient Fenrisian shamanic rituals and runes to channel and filter their psychic powers. That notion, however, begs the question. Do the wolves secretly know their belief system is bullshit, and merely try to minimize the potential dangers of the warp-given powers rather than abolishing them completely, or it just so happens that their shamanic practices coincidentally do it anyway? I personally think it is the latter, but nothing concrete regarding this has been stated in the lore as of yet. That said, the Space Wolves hate Psykers so much they even have specialized witch hunting packs called the Hounds of Morkai. As followers of the cult of Morkai, the Fenrisian twin-headed wolf god of death, the Hounds are extremely grim and cold individuals, and are mostly recruited from the Wolf Scouts of the chapter. To better combat Psykers, the Hounds have runes inscribed into their armor and flesh, as well as totems and trinkets that protect them from the wizard shenanigans thrown their way. The last of somewhat to the side ranks are the Wolfblades, who serve as honor guards sent to Terra to protect the Navigator House Belisarius. It's a long-standing tradition dating back to the days of Ras himself. The deal is quite simple. House Belisarius gets the route's warriors to protect them, and the wolves get a supply of navigators for their ships. If you are familiar with the Dune universe, much of which inspired Warhammer 40k, you can understand how having a good relationship with the Navigator House is of utmost importance. As such, it's considered to be a great honor to become a Wolfblade. However, the wolves don't particularly fancy acting as the glorified bodyguards of imperial nobility, so the position is more often used as a way to temporarily get rid of outcasts and troublemakers. For example, Wolf Lord Ragnar Blackmane, early in his career, managed to mess up enough that at least half of the chapter wanted his head. To save the young but promising warrior, Logan Grimnar sent him to join the Wolfblades as a compromise. Moving on to the unofficial ranks, let's start with the Wolfen. As I mentioned previously, the curse of the Wolfen can affect any member of the Space Wolves chapter. If an aspirant falls victim to the mutation, he is shot on the spot. But what if an already indoctrinated battle brother becomes a little too hairy for comfort? Well, the wolves still hunt them down, but they don't kill them. Instead, they are kept somewhere in the Fen and used in battle. Being little more than mindless beasts, the Wolfen are constantly monitored by the wolf priests, who are also known to command wolfen packs during deployments. This actually happens quite frequently, as these good boys are somehow even more physically capable than normal space wolves, making them an exceptionally dangerous, albeit not very controllable melee fighting force. But the Sons of Ras don't only turn into wolves, they also ride them. On paper, the Thunderwolf Cavalry, which is a subset of the Wolf Guard, doesn't exist, because the Codex Astartes doesn't support the action of riding into battle atop a giant wolf. What a fucking nerd! I mean, what's next? You gonna say that drinking a barrel of mead before battle is not advisable too? Yeah, sure, you can just piss all over my face while you're at it, you goddamn no fun asshole. Nevertheless, the Thunderwolves of Fenris are extremely dangerous creatures with near-human intelligence, making taming one no simple task. It's even used as the rite of passage into the Wolf Guard in one of the great companies. The route uses Thunderwolves as both mounts and companions, with the Iron Priests often augmenting them with bionics to enhance their killing potential even further. As a side note, I maintain that having a giant cyborg wolf mount is the coolest shit ever. Well, a dragon would be cooler, but since I have yet to see a mini of a werewolf alcoholic on a flying lizard, this will do just fine. And now we can finally talk about the top guy of the route, the Great Wolf himself. As I mentioned before, only wolf lords qualify to fill the position of Great Wolf. But this time, the entire chapter votes to choose their leader. Usually the election isn't close at all, as the wolves tend to be fairly objective and unbiased about it. But if the voting results in a tie, the competitors proceed to fight for the title. Unlike chapter masters in Codex-compliant chapters, the Great Wolf, in addition to his new duties, remains the leader of his previous company. The official sigil of the newly appointed Great Wolf changes to that of Leman Russ, the wolf that stalks between stars. However, the warriors under his command may choose to continue displaying their old company's icon, though few do, since bearing the totem of Ras himself is a great honor. The company of the Great Wolf traditionally hosts the chapter's entire priesthood, and is currently the most numerous company, boasting the largest number of Wolfguard battle brothers. In fact, Logan Grimnar's Wolf Guard is so large it has split into several smaller packs, such as the Void Claws armed with dual lightning claws, and the Shield Brothers armed with Thunder Hammers and Storm Shields. But collectively they are known as the King's Guard. To round out the explanation of the Space Wolves ranking system, one specific point needs to be addressed. Although it may appear that rank progression in the route is tied to a Marine's age, that isn't really the case. Deeds and character matter far more to the Wolves than seniority and are the true reasons behind each promotion. For example, take the aforementioned Ragnar Blackmane. When Ragnar became a Wolf Lord, in Space Marine dog years he was basically in his late teens. But he was such a badass that it didn't matter. And to this day he is still the only Space Wolf ever promoted straight from Bloodclaw to a Wolf Guard. This road works both ways though, as seen with Lucas the Trickster. That bastard is undoubtedly one of the most cunning warriors in the entire chapter, and yet he's never made it out of the Bloodclaws. So why is that? Well, because he's a colossal dick. Most of his superiors hate him with passion, intentionally withholding his promotion so Lucas can literally fuck off and die somewhere in the vanguard of the chapter's forces. That said, the Trickster is now in Ragnar's great company, so maybe things will turn around for him in the near future. And while we are on the topic of notable members of the route, let me tell you about my favorite ones from their ranks. Given that I've already mentioned Ragnar Blackmane a couple of times, let's start with him. Ragnar's most iconic deeds, which I haven't mentioned yet, include being the only Space Wolf aspirant in history to kill a Blackmane Fenrisian wolf during the test of Morkai, losing and later returning the Spear of Russ, being the youngest Space Wolf ever promoted to the rank of Wolf Lord, and killing the greatest orc war boss of the current age, Gaskul Mak Uruk Thraka, in a duel. Plain and simple, Ragnar is an absolute legend. So much so that not even death could stop him. During the aforementioned duel with Gaskul, Ragnar pretty much died, but later he was remade into a Primaris Marine, making him even more dangerous to the foes of the route. He is a natural-born leader, and many of his brothers consider him next in line for the position of Great Wolf. That said, he still has much to learn as Blackmane continues to struggle with patience and control over his rage. During Ragnar's time as a Wolfblade, one of his companions was Hager the Mountain. The size of this man's appetite can only be compared to his own, as Hager is an absolute giant, dwarfing most of his brethren, and the only space marine in existence who can accurately be called fat. Hager's gene seed had an unexpected defect that caused his superhuman metabolism to malfunction, allowing him to gain weight. His staggering height and girth made it impossible for him to wear a normal set of power armor, so specific modifications had to be made to accommodate his physique. However, he is described as being more muscle than fat and possesses an unheard of level of physical strength. Hager is able to wield a two-handed thunder hammer with one hand and even throw it just to mix things up. He even once broke a Hellbrute's leg with a single swing of that thing. This guy is straight up Thor, and I absolutely love it. But the adoption of characters from Norse mythology doesn't stop there, because the Space Wolves also have Loki in their midst. Or rather, they have Lucas the Trickster. When the God Emperor was creating Lucas, he must have used cheat codes to max out his charisma and intellect, because the exploits of this man are both extremely effective and funny as hell. For example, he once started an orc civil war by faking a series of Vox transmissions, wiped out an entire Trade Astartes warband by luring them into making planetfall on a barely frozen sea, and even outsmarted Magnus the useless bitch himself. In combat he's no slouch either, as he has only ever been bested once. He lost one of his hearts though, which Lucas later replaced with a stasis grenade so that when his primary heart stops, his killer will be frozen in time forevermore, and Lucas will have his last laugh. He is incredibly smart, fun, and charismatic, and if not for his constant need to prank his comrades, he'd probably be a wolf lord by now. On a more serious note, let's talk about Grandfather Lupus, aka Ulrich the Slayer. Ulrich is the wolf high priest and the oldest living space wolf to date. In fact, he is so old that he was the one who recruited Logan Grimnar back in the day. The fact that even the Great Wolf considers him a mentor, coupled with centuries of wisdom and exceptional martial skill, makes Ulrich arguably the second most respected member of the route after Bjorn. And as far as I know, is also the only space wolf ever to refuse a promotion to Wolf Lord, choosing instead to become a wolf priest. And while we are on the topic of respect, age and wisdom, nobody in the Space Wolves has more of it than Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Appointed as the first chapter master of the route by Ras himself, Bjorn is technically the oldest living space marine in the entire Imperium of mankind. I say technically because he is a dreadnought, meaning a terminal case sealed inside a life support coffin on legs, but even that is incredibly impressive. The fact that Bjorn knew not only Ras but also the Emperor personally means that it's not just the Space Wolves who respect him. Everybody in the goddamn Imperium respects Bjorn. Until very recently, he was literally the last link to the time of the Primarchs and the still living Emperor. And I think much of the Space Wolves' defiance of the current Imperial way of doing things comes directly from that link. Bjorn remembers that the Emperor is not a god and never wanted to be called one. He remembers the values of Russ and the traditions instilled by him, and because of Bjorn the wolves remember all of it too. His authority in the route is unquestionable, and even the Great Wolf takes his word very seriously. Most of the time Bjorn spends his existence sleeping in stasis, as being inside a dreadnought isn't exactly fun, and prolonged wakefulness leads to mental degradation. But every so often he's awakened, either to aid his brothers in times of great need, or to recite the sagas of old during grand feasts. The Space Wolves, however, have another unique dreadnought, but instead of a person on life support, this one is a rabid dog. Nobody really knows where Murderfang comes from. He just appeared one day during the battle against the Alpha Legion, murdering his way through the ranks of the traitor Marines. Even after the battle was won, he wouldn't stop, and only by freezing him solid with Hellfrost weapons were the wolves able to subdue him and place him in stasis. As I mentioned earlier, even Space Wolf dreadnoughts can succumb to the curse of the Wolfen, and Murderfang is one of those cases. Whether it's from an extreme case of werewolf syndrome, or the madness of being awake inside a murder machine for too long, Murderfang's mind seems to be completely lost to endless rage and bloodlust. Nevertheless, he is an incredible asset on the battlefield, and his abilities are put to use quite often during the route's campaigns. And now we can finally talk about the man, the myth, the legend, the wolfiest wolf to ever wolf, second only to Leman Russ himself, Logan fucking Grimnar. Grimnar's saga is almost as long as his spectacular beard, and filled with absolutely unrivaled feats. Logan made a name for himself during the events of the First War for Armageddon, and the following months of shame. The whole thing was a colossal mess, but the old wolf somehow managed to come out of it pretty much scot-free. First of all, he got himself a cool-ass axe forged by, Khorne, the Chaos God of War, which contains a fragment of his power. Logan took it as a trophy after killing a champion of the Blood God with his teeth, and later had the Rune and Iron Priests of the chapter reforge it into his signature weapon, the Axe of Morkai. Secondly, he killed both the chapter master of the Grey Knights and the Inquisitor in charge of the whole affair. And lastly, he sent a very simple but clear message to the entirety of the Imperium. Grimnar won't stand for the abuse of power and dishonorable behavior. And if he catches you doing something he finds unacceptable, no matter your rank or affiliation, you are getting clipped in half. And sure, the Inquisition hates him for it, but the people actually fighting on the front lines absolutely adore the old wolf. Logan Grimnar is a certified badass, who wields a chaos axe that doesn't corrupt him for one reason or the other, can run in Terminator armor, which should be impossible but not for him, and commands unquestionable loyalty and respect from his men through sheer charisma and strength of character. The man fought in countless battles and came out on top virtually every time. Hell, he even fought Magnus and won. And as much as I love to give the Red Pimple shit, this isn't an easy achievement by any stretch of imagination. The Old Wolf is one of the deadliest and most experienced warriors in the entire Imperium. But what truly sets him apart are his wisdom, rationality, and compassion. Traits seldom seen in the other chapter masters, let alone in the Imperium as a whole. And on that beautiful note, let's get into the final segment of the video. I'll start by saying that I love virtually everything about the wolves. I love their aesthetic, I love their characters, I love the traditions and history of the chapter. Hell, over time I even grew to like their baby blue color scheme. The fact that they are this giant brotherhood of space werewolf vikings who inscribe their deeds into the sagas of their lives, ride into the fires of war on giant wolves, hold massive feasts and brew meat strong enough to make a space marine drunk, all of it just pushes the right buttons in my brain. And yes, there are some things about them even I don't like. The wolf had helmets except for the skull one. Do look kinda stupid, making the marine wearing one resemble Goofy on crack. And the number of times I've said the word wolf in this video nearly caused my brain to shut down. But in the grand scheme of things, these nitpicky criticisms don't hold much weight for me. The critique of their lore also falls on deaf ears here, as most of it can be explained logically, and if not, it just makes them even cooler and or more interesting in my book. Could more have been done with their Viking archetype, both in terms of lore and aesthetics? Hell yes. But in my opinion, it is a problem with the setting as a whole rather than just with them. However, all of what I just said absolutely pales in comparison to the real reason why the wolves are my favorite faction. The Space Wolves are no longer the Emperor's executioners. They are the savage defenders of humanity. They embody the idea that what you are does not define who you are. They use their primal rage not to sow chaos and destruction, but to protect the people of the Imperium and the ideals it once stood for. The wolves defy their nature and choose honor over animalistic desire. Their allegiance and respect are not given, they're earned. If you are a coward, a traitor, or a despot, they will tear you apart no matter the side you are on. But if you are a good and honorable person, or simply someone in need, they will stand with you until the very end. As much as that's possible in the grim darkness of Warhammer 40k anyway. And that's exactly why I absolutely love the Space Wolves.